It's a minute to 10:30, and maybe I can start with the very quick introductory part. First of all, I would like to thank everybody who is attending at the moment, and also the future participants. We like the fact that the number of participants is growing bigger by the session. Hopefully, by the third session, we will have more than 50, let's say. I'm very, very optimistic. Thank you very much for joining us this early in the morning. And I would also like to thank everybody for congratulating us for pulling this off. But I cannot emphasize enough that without your help, without the help of our speakers who jumped in, we wouldn't have been able to do this. Angelique explained in the morning in the introductory part how each session is going to be, but I'm just quickly going to revise some of our kind requests, because people will be getting in and out of the session, so that we all know where we are at and what kind of rules we should follow. So just quickly, please keep your microphone muted if you're not a designated speaker. During the presentations, feel free to jot down your questions. And there will be, after the keynote, there will be a question and answer session where you will be able to post or give your questions live. And then we will have statements and responses, very short 5-minute statements and responses, 2 of those. And then there will also be a Q&A session and an open discussion. If you would like to ask a question or comment or whatever, feel free to send a chat directly to me as moderator, or to Angelique as well, no problem. Then you will be given a word later. Also, please be advised that we are recording sessions that will be accessible to members who are not able to attend. And when you finish with your question or comment, please make sure just to say thank you, I am done, so we can move on to the other speaker. We will try to have a discussion that is as interactive as possible, and hopefully we'll have a fruitful one. We're going to begin with our first keynote speaker. I will briefly introduce Kris Pint. Dr. Kris Pint is assistant professor at the Faculty of Architecture and Arts at Hasselt University in Belgium. His teaching and research occupy the domains of cultural philosophy, semiotics, and scenography. His research focuses on literature, interior architecture, and visual arts, more specifically on the alternative possibilities of living, dwelling, and knowing, fundamentals that artistic research helps to explore. He also examines how elements of creative nonfiction can be used in artistic research. And today, he will be giving us a keynote entitled Sensations, Signs, and Stories, Meaning in the Urban Environment. Kris, the Zoom platform is yours.
Okay, thank you. I hope everyone can hear well. I'll start my presentation. So it should be on your screen by now. I would really like to start with thanking Sonja and Angelique, because they did a wonderful job in bringing us together today online. So I really want to thank them also for them taking the lead of our working group. It's very much appreciated. I think I can speak for the whole of the group. So very, very heartfelt thank you to both of you. Okay, well, today I want to talk about the role of meaning in the urban environment. And I think it is necessary that we first have a look at how meaning works. And I think an important book in this regard is Mark Johnston's The Meaning of the Body, The Aesthetics of Human Understanding. And in this book, Johnston makes clear that our common understanding of meaning is much too narrow, much too focused on semantic, conceptual meaning. And what Johnston tries to do is to expand this view. And for him, and I quote, meaning is not just a matter of concepts and propositions, but also reaches down into the images, sensory motor schemes, feelings, qualities, and emotions that constitute our meaningful encounter with our world. So meaning is something that emerges in our embodied relation to and interaction with our environment. So meaning is always also affective, emotional, and sensorial. And this is, of course, very important to keep in mind when we're talking about the meaning of architecture or the built environment. So when we talk about the meaning generated by objects that are architectural buildings, an analysis of these embodied experience is, of course, key. And as an example, I want to discuss the Stadshal, the city pavilion in the center of a mid-sized European city, Ghent. The pavilion was designed by Robrecht en Daam and Marie-José van Hey architects and quickly nicknamed the Schapenstal, the sheep stable. Now, the canopy clearly reflects the architectural and historical context of the site. Yet at the same time, the building drew a lot of critique precisely because of the historical nature of the square where it was situated, right before the belfry. And despite the very obvious references to medieval buildings, the pavilion has a clearly modern look, and its quite massive size indeed obstructs some of the view. And it was even criticized by UNESCO because they were not consulted beforehand. So, and of course, obviously, I think it's an old story, this rather expensive construction was also seen as by some as an unnecessary prestige project, a waste of money that was better spent on perhaps less spectacular, but more effective forms of urban development. So the site is really an interesting and also typical case of conflicting meanings and interpretations. There is the interesting relationship between a modern city and its historical past, but also between tourists and inhabitants, between the local authorities and some of the population, etc. But as Mark Johnson makes clear, the meaningfulness of this space does not only lie in the cultural, socio-political meanings it generates and the underlying city narratives it reveals, but also very much in the actual experiences it generates. The view, of course, but also a kind of emotional and physical sense of shelter, the beautiful working of the light, and of course the rhythmical flow of people coming and going, the movements made by users of the space for different events, like in this case, to use it as a playground. So a proper analysis of the meaning of this urban intervention should also take these embodied meaningful aspects into account. And as Johnson argues in another text, the embodied meaning of architecture, the role of architecture is to intensify this meaningful relationship with the environment. And I quote, my hypothesis is that architectural structures are experienced by humans as both sense-giving and signifying. That is, architectural structures present us first with a way of situating ourselves in or being at home in and making sense of our world. And second, they provide material and cultural affordances that are meaningful for our survival and flourishing as meaning-seeking creatures. But as Johnson himself acknowledges, this almost existential function and value of building echoes Heidegger's famous comments on the temple in his essay on the origin of the work of art. For him, it's the construction of the temple that opens up a world. And it is indeed worth noting that Heidegger focuses here also on the sensuous, experiential aspect of this world. And I quote, the temple's towering makes visible the invisible space of air. The steadfastness of the work contrasts with the surge of the surf, and its own repose brings out the raging of the sea. Tree and grass, eagle and bull, snake and cricket first enter into their distinctive shapes and thus come to appear as what they are. Now, we could argue that in a modern pluralistic city, constructions like the Ghent's city hall acquire the same function as the temple in the Greek polis, making visible the surrounding urban texture, the people, the weather, the atmosphere, and things like that. Yet, I think it's important here to keep in mind that Heidegger, in another text, What Are Poets For, also uses the very same image of the temple to refer to another aspect of existence that opens up a world, namely when he calls language, and I quote, the Precinct, the Templum, that is, the house of being, a very famous quote by Heidegger, Die Sprache ist das Haus des Seins. And just like the actual temple, the physical architectural building, we could argue that it's only through the temple of language that an actual environment can be revealed and can be experienced. And while Johnson is absolutely right, I think, in stressing the importance of non-linguistic forms of meaning and meaningfulness, as humans, we can not escape language. And the fact that to a very large extent, meaning is finally always based on language. And perhaps here we need some semiotics 101 and bring back to mind the important and shocking discovery of Ferdinand de Saussure, who was together with C.S. Peirce, the founder of modern semiology. And Saussure's analysis of language made clear that meaning is not so much a question of reference, of establishing a kind of correct, truthful relationship with the outside world, but a question of differences within the linguistic system itself, both on the level of form, for instance, difference between sounds that generate a difference in meaning, but also, of course, on the level of meaning. And to give a very simple example, if you look at these circles, we see 3 times the same circle, but its meaning, small, full, circular, only becomes visible in opposition to another element. So in order to determine the meaning of an element, there always has to be another differing other with a distinctive difference that allows for meaning to appear. And this discovery had, of course, profound philosophical implications, especially in so-called continental or French philosophy, because now meaning became a question of structures and performances within a system, and a system that always required a form of opposition, of othering to work. And meaning lost its self-evidential nature. Meaning is, in the end, a textual construction. And here, semiotics, in my opinion, reveals a blind spot in Johnson's approach to meaning. In his pragmatist view, our embodied relationship with our environment is holistic, harmonious, or at least strives for such a harmony. But as semiotics makes clear, the creation of meaning is by definition antagonistic, based on radical differences, and thus inherently conflictual. And this is actually obvious in Johnson's own discourse, for instance, with this basic opposition between his own correct embodied viewpoint on meaning when he contrasts it with a faulty Cartesian disembodied one. So at the core of his own discourse is this kind of binary opposition between embodied and disembodied. So meaning always requires oppositions. Also in Heidegger's idea of the temple, it's because of the opposition with the architecture, with the building, that the natural elements, the sea, the trees, the grass, acquire meaning in relation to this temple. And I want to argue that the premises of our cost action, again, inevitably also have this implicit antagonism. For instance, we want to thematize the medium-sized city, both in opposition to the rural, the countryside, but also to the metropole. And it's this opposition, this set of oppositions to both of these terms that allow our common research object to become meaningful and interesting. And I think that the same principle of difference, of antagonism, is also at work in the structure of narratives, the meaning sequences that we use to interpret our environment. And here I give it a very, for literary theorists at least, very classical, old school example of the so-called existential model by Gréma, um, which is the abstract blueprint of every story. There's an opposition between the subject, the protagonist, who wants something of someone else, an object, and who has helpers and opponents with, again, conflicting interests. And I think it's also important to understand how the urban stories we explore and perhaps even formulate in discussed action also, perhaps inadvertently, follow this system of oppositions. For instance, when we look at the male-female oppositions in the use of public space, but perhaps also between locals and new immigrants, between high and low income households, or in the contemporary Vogue, between the human and the non-human, or when we try to make narrative sense of what happens in a specific urban context, when we create a story with helpers, for instance, community workers, versus opponents. And I guess project developers are the usual suspect and villains in many of these stories. So depending on the frame, the same actions can be perceived in a radically different light. An attempt to, for instance, to evaluate historical dimension, the rich heritage of a specific urban area, can help to give meaning and generate a sense of pride and empowerment for the local population. But it can also be used to gentrify an area, to gradually push out lower income households. So basically, we are in a catch-22 here. We need the temple, we need this house of language, we need stories to make meaning, to make something useful, to make something meaningful. But of course, this is merely a construction of a specific urban reality. And of course, I'm very much aware of the fact that these are postmodernist truisms. But I think it's still very much worth keeping in mind as we go along with this really tricky concept of meaningfulness, if only because semiotics makes clear that meaningfulness, the need for meaning, the flourishing of meaning, as Johnson calls it, is not necessarily always a good thing. And this, I think, becomes very clear when we look at another case study, which is the Pergamon altar, which was part of the Pergamon Acropolis, now in Bergama, a city in Turkey. And a famous reproduction of this altar can be found in the Pergamon Museum in Berlin. And we could say that this altar originally functioned as an example of an Heideggerian kind of temple, an edifice that opened and grounded and founded a world for the inhabitants of this ancient city. And this is also made clear by the theme of the frieze that made this altar so famous, the Gigantomachy, the battle the battle against the giants, the primeval forces of chaos that were defeated by the Olympic gods, who then imposed their order on the cosmos. And the altar has this kind of typical majesty of the classical style, imitated in so much neoclassical buildings we can find in cities around the world, like it was in the news lately, the Supreme Court of the United States. And all the meaningful features that Mark Johnson attributes to architecture can be found intensified by this specific building, containing verticality, balance, and of course also expressing forces like gravity and movement with a very impressive, enormous staircase. But you would say that this building is already packed with enough cultural and historical meaning, and yet it can still generate other meanings. Only last month, the Pergamon Museum was a target of conspiracy theorists who threw an oily substance on dozens of artifacts, probably in a sort of ritual cleansing. They might have been inspired by the paranoid ideas of a certain Attila Hildmann, who believed and also, alas, propagated, based on a biblical verse, that the altar was in fact the throne of Satan. And Hildmann and his followers believe that there exists a kind of secret society of Satanists who use the altar for human sacrifices. And it's a satanic cult which also involved no one less than Bundeskanzler Angela Merkel, who happens, by accident of course, to live near the museum. And it's scary, but it's also fascinating to see how effective and easily such an ancient story got revived. The story of secret gatherings of bad people sacrificing and eating children was, ironically, also used to vilify the early Christians in the Roman Empire. Of course, another well-known variety of this story is the belief in a witch Sabbath. But what is new, of course, is the way in which these paranoid meanings can now travel in the parallel virtual polis of the internet and social media, mostly invisible for those not in the same bubble. People sitting next to you in public transport may share the same actual place, but the mental space accessed through their mobile devices might be radically different. Their linguistic temple, so to speak, has become invisible to others, opening up another world altogether, where satanic stories actually can survive, where 5G and vaccination are means to control the population, and where, in fact, Donald Trump won the election. These stories seem to defy and resist the kind of technocratic, scientific functionalism that seems to be the hallmark of contemporary modern society. And for the sociologist Michel de Certeau, it's exactly this post-war technocracy that was in the first place responsible for the destruction of viable cities, because it destroyed meanings and the ancient stories that were attached to a specific place. And I think it's a story that can be used for very different.
2 more minutes.
Okay, thank you. European cities, like the area near the Brussels North Station, which they in the 60s completely destroyed. And it creates a very uncanny landscape. I think many European cities share the same story. So, and with the vandalism of the Pergamon Museum in mind, this quote from de Certeau, from the Practice of Everyday Life, seems very timely, where stories are disappearing or else being reduced to misographical objects. There is a loss of space. Deprived of narrations, as one sees it happens in both the city and the countryside, the group of individuals regresses toward a disquieting, fatalistic experience of a formless, indistinct, and nocturnal totality. And precisely because heritage like this Pergamon altar became a museal object, a relic of the past, it's no longer able to provide some kind of spiritual center. And a great deal of the population feels lost in this kind of nocturnal totality. In a contemporary gigantomachy where the new giants are established political parties, big corporations, global organizations, and big media outlets that can be blamed for all what goes wrong in society today. And it are these counter stories, often very grim and violent, that came to replace the stories that got erased in the past decades. And as Certeau puts it, it is this extermination which makes the city a suspended symbolic order. And I think what in this quote is especially important is the last sentence. Except for that, according to another city dweller, there are only places in which one can no longer believe in anything. And I think Certeau was right. Stories and legends can be fully erased. And contemporary society often faces an almost desperate search for stories to believe in. And the example of the Pergamon altar vandalism also makes clear that these resisting stories and new beliefs are not always nice and peaceful. But however disconcerting, the rise of conspiracy theories and bleak fictions show indeed that there's this desperate need for meaning, for something to believe in. And it cannot be provided by a mere functionalist, economical, technocratic outlook on the city. And it's also revealing the potential danger of concepts like smart cities, even with the best intentions, for instance, fighting climate change, because such an approach runs the risk of repeating the errors of the past and the arrogance of modernist urbanists, of experts that think that they cannot control the city and its stories. Now to conclude, I think that the difficult question now is what the role could and should be of urbanists, designers, anthropologists, and cultural philosophers faced with such a complex situation. And I think from our shared background in the humanities, we know that there's this need for meaning, for meaningfulness, as an important, crucial aspect of a viable future urban ecosystem, just like renewable energy or clean mobility. And perhaps our common task can only be rather modest, to explore and to develop the narrative, meaningful capabilities of the built environment, to provide an ecosystem where different stories and meanings can thrive. And again, meanings that are not only stories or concepts, but also embodied experiences, affects, emotions, senses. Meanings that go from bodily movements to atmospheres to bigger stories, linking the city both to a past and the future. And this, of course, to avoid a kind of narrative desert, like the notion of the urban food desert, the areas where you can't get to healthy food easily, which creates a sense of meaninglessness that attracts paranoid, violent meanings to fill the void. I thank you all.
Thank you very much, Kris. It was a pleasure to listen to the lecture. These 20 minutes went by so fast. I am sorry to have to interrupt you or to remind you that you should be nearly finished, but we really want to make this as interactive as possible. I would like to hereby open the Q&A session. We have some time, so please feel free to let us know if anybody has a question or a comment or would like to share some thoughts. Feel free to unmute yourself or give some kind of a signal.
Okay. Thank you, Kris, for your wonderful lecture, and which combined some very important references as well as your own take on meaning. What I found intriguing in the beginning of your lecture, and something that I think is very valuable for our network to think about, is this linguistic and non-linguistic side of meaning. That is, it's on the one hand based on language, but as much as it is based on language, it is based on sensory experience, embodied experience, on affect. And maybe it's time not to see that so much as an opposition, but to be aware that language could also express and evoke sensory experience. Maybe more a comment than a question.
Well, I think it's a very relevant one, because I think one of the advantages, not only of architecture, but also of literature, for instance, is that it's more allowed than, let's say, academic discourse to integrate emotions and affects and descriptions of sensations in its own discourse. As an academic, you're not supposed to have a body or supposed to have a memory or desire, or whatever. But of course, writers can write what they want, and they can give by writing, of course, and by using language, a kind of access to these kind of urban experiences that are not very easily conceptualized or put into a specific theoretical framework. So yes, I think that's the whole interesting point of this action, is to use literature as a kind of access to these embodied experiences.
Yeah.
Can I say something? Kris, thank you for this nice presentation. And I'd like to highlight just, a phrase that I like very much, desert of narratives. I like this idea, and maybe later on we can take our opportunity to elaborate on this issue. So even though the buildings are, remaining the same, narratives are changing, and maybe we are storing and restoring, these narratives, and that needs maybe further elaboration. Thank you for this nice presentation and for this concept. Okay, that's all.
Yeah, I really when I first heard the idea of the food desert, I was thinking, well, what are they talking about? And of course, people can get to food in a city, but not always to healthy food. So if the only food available is, let's say, fast food or kind of, but not a food market with fresh vegetables, for instance, or not easily accessible by public transport or whatever, then you get a food desert. And I really like that concept. And I think you can have the same with narratives, the kind of lack of stories. Again, stories and meaning in the broadest sense. I think I displayed, I think it's Aldo van Eyck, one of his playgrounds, where people can have bodily experiences as create a meaningful space. But that is lacking. I think paranoid conspiracy theories and narratives fill the void because people need stories, and if they don't get proper stories, they'll find ways to find complete bunkers narrative just to have narratives, just like we need foods.
And maybe it is a far-fetched idea, but even the recipe books and the narratives, through the recipe books, living, the cities or the urban places are living through, and recipe books and such, food programs are so popular nowadays, and these issues are also interesting. Okay, thank you for this idea. Okay.
Thank you, Mustafa.
Can I add something?
Yes, please. Yes, please.
Thank you, Kris, for the presentation. I think was wonderful and connected with some of contemporary issues. Because I think that you talked a little bit about semiology and the relation of semiology with phenomenology as the two main trends of the second half of the 20th century were very present in what we call the cultural studies. But this embodied experience in which, as Klaske was saying, the meaning being kind of linguistic or more emotional response. But somehow I think that the issue, and your presentation somehow hints on this, is this political embodied experience, because it's about meaning, it's about emotion, but it's also about the political issue that we are facing these days. And we know the issues that we are now facing with monuments, with how we deal with the meaning of the monuments from the past, and how we constantly are re-evaluating this kind of projection that we give through the historical figures and events, and how we are re-elaborating and criticizing this perspective. I would say also that in terms of post-structuralism that somehow make the connection between semiology and phenomenology, somehow it tries to defend the idea of difference and the idea of making impossible the closeness of meaning. But we can somehow have the difficulty in getting this post-structuralist criticism without falling into this kind of relativism that we are somehow experiencing. So I would ask, how can we make and introduce this political issue in this kind of embodied experience and the building of narratives?
I think you make a very good remark, and it's kind of also personal frustration, because I came from literary theory in the beginning of the years 2000, and it was all post-structuralism, and it was very textual oriented, and it completely forgot the body. And then when I moved more in towards architectural theory, I saw the very interesting kind of revival of phenology and this kind of existential phenology and Heidegger and things like that. But I missed the kind of critical voice there. in the work of Palasma, and I really appreciate it. It was kind of, if you talk about food desert, it was, yes, let it come. It's interesting. It's back to the body, and it's. But I missed also in Mark Johnson's very pragmatism, kind of American optimism, and if you think, well, if you read psychoanalysis, the idea of a body that relates in a harmonious way to the environment is just not true. The body is also very violent, and I think the link with politics lies there. Is this kind of relationship between the kind of discursive nature of the political discourse, where oppositions, like in America, Democrats versus Republicans, is a very binary opposition almost, but it's been driven by very passionate, embodied impulses, on both sides of the aisle. You see a very affectionate relationship to what is happening, which is of course very dangerous, because it leaves out the kind of rational thinking that you have, because our side is winning or losing, and there's a kind of effective, I think it's called doom scrolling, the kind of being addicted to bad news in your news feed, which is a very embodied way to respond. And things like social media are very interesting in that regard, because of course it's discursive, it's kind of flood of opinions, but the fact of being addicted to it was almost constructed from a kind of psychological perspective of addiction, of people. I think that they were inspired by the slot machines in Las Vegas to make their platforms as addictive as possible. And I think there's a very dangerous way of combining the body in a kind of discursive context, which leads to the kind of body taking over, kind of repulsion or desire or affect, without a kind of rational distance of thinking, oh, what's going on. I think it's very relevant, and I think one of the tasks is to combine the criticism of post-structuralism with phenomenology. Both see part of the truth, I think, but they have to be combined. And I think for me personally, someone like Roland Barthes, who in his later work really focused on semiotics and the body, and the in a very idiosyncratic way, he used the idea of the fantasy, the very embodied link to a discourse. And when I found the work of Barthes, I really found the kind of person who was able to join the idea of semiotics and everything that comes with that, and the idea of reevaluating the body and the way our body can passionately engage with the discourse or architectural context. And I think Roland Barthes, especially very interesting for architects and urbanists, is his first lecture course on how to live together, comment vivre ensemble, which is of course very interesting, because those two theories come together. Yeah.
May I add something, Sonia?
Yeah, of course, please.
Thank you very much, Kris. Very, very inspiring lecture and very beautiful comments so far. I was wondering, based on the latest discussion with Louise about the political part of this conversation, how do you see the thinking of political theorists like Hannah Arendt, for example? Because for me, always Arendt's space of appearance is always a helpful tool to combine a little bit these oppositions, like this idea of the coming together of people that is by default a political act, and combines both the semiotics, the language, and the embodied experience, at least the way I interpret and understand it, and how this space of appearance is completely jeopardized nowadays, not only because of the pandemic, but also through the extreme advocacy and extreme introduction of mediating techniques of supposedly coming together through online platforms, through and how that can have like an influence on the meaning of that, if we are actually sharing that meaning that much. Because I liked very, very much what you said at the beginning, which is, of course, the basics and the elemental thing, but we tend to forget that we strive for meaning, that it's impossible to imagine a life without a meaning. And that's something we don't discuss, but it's at the very core of how we lead our lives. And that's why all the self-help books, apart from the cookbooks that are very popular, all the self-help books, how to do that, how to become that, how to be the perfect academic, how to be the perfect, I don't know, mother, father, parent, all these things are also very popular. It's this strive for meaning. Sorry, that might have been too much. Maybe it was more brainstorming than a question.
No, but I'm not a political theorist. So, but I think one of the things that seems lacking, you have to put it very broadly, you have this opposition between a kind of, and now it has become right-wing movement and alternative right and things like that. And then you have the kind of perhaps left, which is more technocratic and more moderate and more, but the good stories, between brackets, are used by the alternative right. And it's very interesting to see how a notion, and that's why the Certeau is at the same time still very relevant and at the same time very outdated, because an idea like l'imagination au pouvoir of Paris 68, imagination, let's give it power. Well, we see what happens when you give imagination power. You get alternative facts and alternative reality. So it's, I think, and that's perhaps in line with Hannah Arendt, what is necessary is to have kind of counter narratives that can provide other stories than the fact that, and to allow in a healthy democracy to have these kind of, even if they are fictions, political stories that have a horizon that goes beyond budgets and beyond the kind of actuality, but to have this kind of mythical line. Because things like build the wall is an architectural metaphor, but also very embodied kind of need for shelter and the need for, and we can be very smug about it and think, oh, the stupid people who need a wall, but they reflect a kind of need for protection, a need for shelter. And by looking down on these kind of mythical stories is, I think, a big mistake. But yeah, again, I'm not a politician, I'm not a political theorist, but it feels like a lack in our kind of academic technocratic discourse that we look down on that kind of mythical storylines, because other people are not looking down on it, but using it.
Well, thank you, Kris. Super to the point. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any more questions and comments? We will also have another open discussion session after our statements and responses. So feel free to jot some more thoughts and ideas down. We will have some more time. If there aren't any more questions and comments at this point, I would like to invite Saskia de Wit from the Technical University of Delft to give her 5-minute statements. Saskia, I won't have to give you any warnings, 5 minutes, short, simple, sweet, provocative. We're looking forward to it. You have the floor.
Thank you, Sonja. And also thank you, Kris, for this very relevant talk, which touches upon so many ideas that I'm not sure whether I could add anything, but at least I will try. And I also felt that some of the things that you said, yes, it's also kind of my topic, my idea. And that is mainly, I think, what you were talking about, the concept of embodied experience. Talking about that, so Stephen Kent Peterson wrote already, I think, in the 70s or 80s, if there can be no form without meaning, there can be no meaning without form. So I want to talk a little bit about this idea of the form. The perceivable form of the physical landscape structure serves and enhances experience, creates the conditions, the organization of the sensory experience that is the source of the meanings or meaningfulness each of us derives from or attributes to the environment. It is the sensory qualities that are the inherent attributes of the physical environment, which serve as a stimulus or catalyst for the transaction between people and the landscape. So meaningfulness, when we talk about meaningfulness in the urban environment, is always a fact of sensory perception. However, nowadays, in thinking about embodied experience and effective relationships, we tend to define experience or perception mainly focused on the reception of the stimuli, the seeking of information. However, sensory information is not in the first place an asset of the perceiver, but of the perceived object, place, or landscape. All experiences, smells, sounds, weight, temperature, texture, are localized in one perceptual space. And it is these conditions, not the subjective experience, perception, or meaning, that should form the starting point of research on meaning in the urban environment. We should shift our attention to the qualities of the perceived, the physical surroundings as carriers of the meaning or meanings. The qualities of the urban landscape only become meaningful if they can be experienced. The structural elements are not so much images with a defined meaning, but bodily perceivable kinesthetic events that allow for each and every urban dweller or visitor to create their own narrative. As Eugene Victor Walter writes in Placeways, a place is a location of experience. It evokes and organizes memories, images, feelings, sentiments, meanings, and the work of imagination. The feelings of a place are indeed the mental projections of individuals, but they come from collective experience and they do not happen anywhere else. They belong to the place. So the question is not so much whether visitors or urban dwellers consciously perceive what is there to be perceived, the meaning that we derive from the urban environment as an asset of the perceiver, but to unearth what it is that the place holds as an asset of the perceived, the perceivable form of the urban landscape. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Saskia. Wonderful. We would like to invite Honorina to be our responder and to give her own thoughts and ideas on the topic. Honorina, take the platform. I'm sorry, Honorina is from the Dimitrie Cantemir Christian University in Bucharest.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. So when I started preparing this statement, I took a very personal approach, focusing on my fields of interest and starting with the question, what on earth could I say meaningful in 5 minutes? So all joke aside, I truly believe that words are for literature what brings to architecture. And the very concept of meaningfulness depends on how they collocate and how they are brought together in order to convey a meaning. And to understand the origin of words in the way which the meanings have changed throughout history, we have etymology. But the tools for understanding architecture, to my mind, are more numerous. There is history, industrialization, mancrafting, cartography, in what layers and layers of human achievements and stories to tell. The style in which a building is designed or constructed refers to a specific period, place, culture. And if we add to this compare and produce analogy, the idea of urban literacy, we can say that the neighborhood is the unit of it, a content producing unit. So this leads me to the common ground points in terms of channels and tools, communication, storytelling, culture, and in terms of a frame, a playground, the urban place. So I would say that the urban place is a perfect space to bring together different research areas in order to respond to such a complex and multifaceted place. Meaning comes from a profound understanding of serious and important elements, and literary agency reflects the encounter with the other. In times when discourse on globalization and transnationalism is so dominant and omnipresent, the urban space is the perfect scene, a conglomerate that is informing and self-replicating of our day-to-day cultural ambience. A sense of nationality and ethnicity with its attendant stereotyping still informs our daily lives, crosses our daily urban routes, and circuits, and remain an important criterion in categorizing human activity and cultural practices. So a historically and theoretically informed method for understanding this way of inflecting culture through perceptions of national characters remains indispensable. I'd say that cultural representations, including those of otherness, often used demarcation principles set along in geography, region, national, or cultural lines. The image building question lays on visuals, urban landscape, translation studies. To put it in other words, change and hybridity are important features for cities, and that raised the questions of national and cultural stereotyping. And if we could add to that ideas of getting the meaning out of things, thinking about Lacan's theory of the big and the little other, or the Derrida's ideas on hospitality, we may have even more methods and tools to reach the meaningfulness of our urban spaces. That would be it. I will skip my last slide.
Thank you very much, Honorina. We will next have another statement by Adriana Martins from the Universidade Católica Portuguesa. Adriana, you have the floor. Adriana, please unmute.
Yes, yes.
There
I
you
always
go.
forget
Okay.
this. Okay, let me share my my screen. Can you see it? Okay. So this mini online conference aims at discussing the three terms about which our cost action writing urban places revolves. That is meaningfulness, appropriation, and integration. As I have already stated in one of our meetings, I cannot understand one term without talking about the other two, and I hope to have time to explain that through the case study I would like to discuss with you. Today, I will address the issue of meaningfulness, associating it to urban places and to a problematic neighborhood in the Lisbon metropolitan area located in the municipality of Amadora called Cova da Moura. My starting point is Marco G's opposition between place and non-place in supermodernity, and I would like to play with these notions with a view to reconfiguring them when we think about problematic urban neighborhoods. Auger, in his volume, Non-Places, Introduction to an Anthropology of Supermodernity, characterizes a place as relational, historical, and concerned with identity. In other words, a space is considered a place when someone confers meaning on it. A non-place would not have these features. It would be devoid of meaning, even if contractual relationships exist, as motorways, service stations, big stores, hotel chains, and airports illustrate. I'd like to explore the opposition between place and non-place based on the position of enunciation from which one looks at or considers and consequently defines what a place or a non-place might be. In other words, the non-place that I am proposing here is different from Auger's non-place, as it's not a space where many people circulate with specific aims being considered not as humane, but instead as a kind of objects, as individuals are seen and treated as numbers devoid of personality. Depending on the position of enunciation from which a space is characterized, it can be transformed into a place or a non-place. My claim is that, in line with Auger, a place is anthropological whenever it's considered a place of identity, of relations, of history, a place that entails a sense of belonging and affects. However, depending on the position of enunciation and the meaning attributed to it, it can be transformed into a non-place in the sense that it is rendered unimportant, dangerous, threatening, a kind of ghetto. Cova da Moura is a neighborhood that can be considered a meaningful place for its inhabitants and a non-place that is insignificant, unimportant, worthless for those who see it as a space where illegal constructions abound and urban criminality and violence spread. The neighborhood has existed since 1974, and it was initially inhabited by the returnees that came to continental Portugal with processes of decolonization. And here we have an old photo from the neighborhood. The proximity and good accesses to Lisbon were assets. This population increased in the late 1970s and 1980s by African immigrants, mostly from Cape Verde, that started to build their houses with the support of the community and with available materials. These illegal constructions built in private and state lands increased up to a point that the population density was so high that living conditions in some parts were very bad. In a nutshell, this is a neighborhood mainly inhabited by people with low levels of education, who have menial jobs, and who have to tackle with racism, and in some cases, the replication of colonial relationships of power in a post-colonial Portugal. What is interesting about Cova da Moura is that its inhabitants do not want to leave it. Many inhabitants already born in Portugal consider themselves more Cape Verdean than Portuguese due to racism and to the stigma related to the bad reputation of Cova da Moura. Community bonds have been very strong, and this is a neighborhood that counts with a very dynamic association of inhabitants that was founded in 1987, the Associação Cultural Moinho da Juventude, whose social, cultural, and professional initiatives reinforce these bonds. The sense of community is strengthened by the small commerce that exists in the area, cafes, restaurants, hairdressers, and that are sought for Cape Verdean immigrants who do not inhabit Cova da Moura, but are eager to keep contact with their traditions. One of the ways of keeping these bonds strong is the hip hop culture, mainly through rap songs and street art murals. Rap lyrics in Cape Verdean Creole and in Portuguese narrate the difficulties of generations of immigrants in Portugal and address the identity ambiguities of young Portuguese who feel many times more Cape Verdean than Portuguese, even if they have never visited Cape Verde. Issues of violence, mainly perpetrated by the police or by gangs, and the stigma of being born in Cova da Moura, together with issues of a wide range of prejudice, are also dominant themes. Rap has gained such visibility inside and outside the neighborhood that a studio called Cova M Studio, this is a photo of the Cova M Studio, was created in 2007, and many rappers from the neighborhood and also from other areas have had the chance to record their work here for the first time. It is my contention that rap lyrics contribute to confer meaning on Cova da Moura, assuming more than a dimension of novelty and creativity, a dimension of resistance against those who have transformed Cova da Moura into a non-place by associating it only to crime, disorder, and violence. In other words, it is my contention that rap lyrics, by epitomizing the act of words taking, and here I am thinking about the sector, and of writing about life in a controversial neighborhood, trigger a process that derives in what could be considered a dual hermeneutics, a hermeneutics of place and a hermeneutics of the other, that deserve to be investigated in articulation with issues of appropriation and integration, as this dual hermeneutics paves the way for interlocution. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Adriana. Wonderful and provocative ideas. Now we would like to invite Victoria Bogdanova from the Faculty of Architecture in Ljubljana to give her own thoughts on the issue.
Hello. Thank you for inviting me here, and thank you for the beautiful presentations and discussions that already unfolded. Where to start? I would like to connect the last statement with the initial presentation. We were speaking about these non-places, these terrain vagues that are, how to say, emptied of meaning. But it was also discussed about the narrative desert in the first presentation, and I can relate that to the book of Dino Buzzati, The Desert of the Tatars, and the film that is based on that, like Waiting for the Barbarians, where actually it is about a city, a small village that lies on the edge of the desert, and on the other side of the wall is the desert and a legend that there are some kind of barbarians and foreigners, so to say, someone else, and they're convinced that they are bad and violent. So it is also about these prejudices that you were speaking about. And I relate this to what Kris named the need for the opponent. Like, even though he or she doesn't exist, the need to, how to say, demonize or humiliate someone in order to be a protagonist. And I'm posing the question, I mean, I'm far from defining how this relates to architecture, except by symbols, but another immense reference in my life when we are speaking about the topic of meaningfulness is Viktor Frankl. He's this Austrian psychotherapist who based the school about logotherapy, and he was he survived the concentration camps in during the Nazi period, and his whole philosophy is based upon the will for meaning. Like, even in the darkest moments and periods of life, one must be able to have the courage to be lonely and to find meaning even in that. Because I don't know, I think we are talking about the political and the collective, how to say, aspects of that, but of what we are talking about, but somehow this search for meaning, striving for meaning, as Miss Angelique just said, I think that it is the basis of a healthy mode of being in the world. Yeah, we were also talking about the embodied knowledge. Kris mentioned how we mentioned plasma and so on, and how is it related to architecture more directly. But I think that we should also not forget the research through design practice and the design-driven research, where actually the researcher and his embodied knowledge and embodied memory is something that cannot be separated from his theory about things and from his making. I mean, the anthropologist Tim Ingold is also talking about this need of the tacit understanding of wayfaring, of the concept of wayfaring as a combination of movement and attention in the process of making. Like, I use this reference very often because I'm familiar with his work, and he's a regular, how to say, supervisor of my work. Professor Johan van den Berge from the Faculty of Ghent, where in his PhD thesis, he's having a whole chapter, it's named Book of Narratives, about excavating the memory related to the house of his grandmother, investigating how did those principles that he experienced then are actually appearing in his practice as a whole in all of the projects. And by making what was unconscious conscious, he's actually, by self-cognition, he's contributed to the world to find methods and tools how to help others to do the same. Because I cannot, how to say, I cannot divide the place of encounter and the connectedness with another, the need to connect and to extend, to flow towards other person, from the need to actually dig deep into oneself like another. I mean, there are just so many things to think about. I don't know how to wrap this up, but
Thank you, Victoria. This was actually wonderful. Please, if you have some more thoughts, you can share them in the discussion, which I would like to now open for everybody. Feel free to unmute yourselves, add, comment, ask further questions. Victoria, if you'd like to continue, there is some more time, but I would like to emphasize that we would like to have an open discussion at this point.
Yes. Okay.
Are there any comments?
I want to thank Victoria for a very relevant remarks. I think indeed also the link with the rap lyrics. I think rap lyrics are a way to fight this kind of narrative desert, because they're providing narratives. But again, I think rap music is a very good example of the way how meaning is also related to affect and emotions, because it's not only lyrics, it's also music. You know, the kind of cars driving by with a very loud basses, of course, very classical example, but it's also how they kind of give rhythm and meaning to city experiences. So I think that's another good example of how meaning is more than just a kind of textual aspect of this music.
Yes. I mean that the example with the rap music, yes. I mean, isn't it a kind of a therapy, a kind of finding one's own language to actually express, to actually find meaning in difficult circumstances?
Yes. And it's a cultural concept that really fascinates me. The song lines of the Australian Aboriginals, the idea that you travel through a landscape based on stories, narrative stories about mythical events that happened there, but also, of course, the rhythm of the song in some bizarre way reproduces the form of the landscape. So just by memorizing a song, the lyrics, but also the rhythm and the music, they can orient. I think it's in line with Tim Ingold, kind of wayfaring.
Yes.
And do not forget the dance as well.
Yeah, of course, the dance and the movements. Yeah, it's kind of very multisensorial, multimodal discourse. So I think, Adriana, it's a very interesting way to address the city through rap lyrics. I think it's a very fruitful approach.
I really do not know if rap lyrics could be considered a therapy. I think it's undeniable. There is a cathartic element when we talk about rap lyrics. I see them more, I see rap more as a way of resisting to problems, and also a way of denouncing some situations. And for example, it's very interesting, but it would be out of the scope of this very short presentation, to consider how gender is being addressed by rap lyrics in Portugal, because as you know, this is a very masculine environment, and other issues that are related to different societies, such as domestic violence and violence against women and so on, that can be addressed, and that also inform the way we understand a certain place, because a place is also written through, as Kris had pointed out, through the relationships that people invest then with. Okay.
I would just like to add that Dace wanted to say something, and then Klaske and Susanna. Susanna also, right?
Yeah.
Okay, Dace.
Yeah. Good afternoon, because it's already past noon in my country. I just wanted to add a short comment in reaction to Adriana's talk. I think she brought a very important aspect in her discussion of the concept of non-place. And it somehow goes already without saying, and this idea can be traced back to Michel Desserteau and others, that if we designate something as a non-place, we should always ask, it is non-place for whom? So the position or perspective of the meaning-making subject is very important. And yeah, this Desserteau's notion of culture in plural, and we can probably also say meaning or meaningfulness in plural. So that's my comment.
Thank you very much. Klaske sent in a chat. Klaske?
Well, I was fascinated by the order of presentations, as I think intendedly or not, they really work very well together. As Saskia asked us to look at the forms themselves, actually as at the physical environment that may carry meaning, rather than to look only at how we perceive it, but rather what is already there. Then Honorina made a plea for looking at the scale of the urban neighborhoods, and on that scale to look at visual culture and stories. And then Adriana followed up with an urban neighborhood and speaking exactly about this visual culture and rap culture and culture of stories expressed in different means. And then I think Victoria gave a lot of beautiful references from a novel to some references in psychotherapy and anthropology. But what I found also very, very important, what you said, Victoria, at the very end, was the value of research through design practice. Because I think that's also something that we hope to do within this network, to indeed build on our capacity to design and to imagine new transformations, giving new meaning to places. So I felt that this whole sequence of statements and responses was a very well-woven storyline in itself. I almost would think that you have thought of that order in as a starting point, but I think that also that idea of what is this research through design, how can we learn also to work in group 4, how can we learn from our projects, from these fieldwork projects, as how can we study them and derive knowledge from it. So I just wanted to thank you for all your contributions and just finding a line between them.
Thank you very much, Klaske. Apologies to Susanna, I misread her hand wave. Sorry, but Saskia in the meantime wanted to ask a question. So Saskia, please, you have the floor.
Yes, it's actually a very specific question to Adriana, because I now realized when Klaske told about this storyline, I'm wondering this neighborhood that you are talking about and this specific culture of rap that emerged there. It has, of course, a lot to do with the Cape Verdean background, the fact that they felt as immigrants, their cultural setup. Do you think, or do you know, or do you have ideas on how this would have happened if this group of people would have been put or would have grown up or would have lived in a different part of the city. So how much, actually my question is, how much do you think or do you know it is related to this physical structure of this neighborhood? You have ideas on that?
There are works that deal with this physical configuration, and I even thought about bringing an aerial image, because the neighborhood is divided into 5 main parts, and it has been considered one of the critical neighborhoods the municipalities have wanted to intervene in. I think here the bonds of among the Cape Verdeans are very important, and I believe that if they were concentrated on another neighborhood, the same would happen. We had in this municipality of Amadora another neighborhood also occupied by Cape Verdeans, but they were all relocated into new buildings, and they were very, very unhappy. And we could have here a different analysis, because this has been documented by Portuguese filmmaker Pedro Costa, okay, showing how these bonds were broken, and how the relocation, because of redevelopment projects, was very bad to the community. Okay.
But doesn't that then affect more of just the fact that they were relocated without their own choice and without their own kind of, so more the kind of the social story?
Yes, mainly the social, because they were relocated to apartments, okay? And all that street life, that community life was somehow lost. And the images I have chosen to try to emphasize this aspect of the street life, and that reproduces the sort of life these communities also had in Cape Verde. Okay. Yeah.
I just want, before we end the session, to give a response to you, Ms. Santiana, about the issue with the therapy. So there are not misunderstandings. When I say therapy, I say something that is, or healing. I mean something that is necessary to live, how to say, healthy or normally. So in my world, like it was about poetry and drawing, and it was about it helped me to find my own voice. And as Van den Bergen names it, a place of resistance. So it was a kind of a silent place of resistance, but how to say, it became a place where I could free myself from any authority and to hear to my own voice, and then be able to communicate it with someone else. And I discovered just a few days ago, Lorde names this thing, I mean, this, how to say, mode, or yes, mode of thinking. Poetry is not a luxury. And she was this feminist that that was not only speaking on the paper, but she was actually an activist who was fighting for the rights of women. And I would like to conclude with one really quite short paragraph from her text that also relates to what Kris named about feelings and sensations and so on. Within structures defined by profit, by linear power, by institutional dehumanization, our feelings were not meant to survive. Kept around as unavoidable adjuncts or pleasant pastimes, feelings were meant to kneel to taught us as we were meant to kneel to men. But women have survived. as poets, and there are no new pens. We have felt them all already. We have hidden the facts in the same place where we have hidden our power. They lie in our dreams, and it's our dreams that point the way to freedom. They are made realizable through our poems that give us the strength and courage to see, to feel, to speak, and to dare. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Would anybody like to respond at this moment or give a comment? Angelique?
Yes, thank you, Sonia. I have been thinking about this very beautiful interweaving of the stories in which all of them, as Klaske showed, and as all of you contributors, thank you so much, emphasized a lot this idea of the conflicts, of opposites coming together and where meaning emerges, which is just so fascinating. I have been thinking on that from the perspective of an educator, from a perspective that is sitting on a studio with architectural students designing spaces that are trying all the time to eliminate every possible conflict. And we are heading in a society that everything has to be as comfortable as possible, so comfortable that we have no understanding of how it happens. Like, I can push this button and I can take high resolution images and I have no idea how this happens. I have no idea. Technology becomes invisible for our own comfort, but at the end, depriving us of the opportunity of having meaning. And I always find as a great ally, particularly when I teach students, Friedrich Kiesler's Endless House, a project that he hoped for his whole life to build but never built, that nothing allows the body to be comfortable, because Kiesler thought that by the lack of comfort, we are constantly active participators in the meaning of our own life. So imagine that it was a house that the floors were not horizontal, they were meant to be curvilinear, because Kiesler thought that by going up and down that you discover your possibility to fly. The shower was meant to remind you of the mythic events of opening the seas in the Bible, or in what it means, the beauty of having water just coming in your space like that. The walls were meant for you to, not, as Kiesler said it, not to put art and forget the art there, but just meant to be for you creating your own art with graffitis and sitting on it. And every single aspect was meant to really create this kind of tensions, not in order to torture the inhabitant, in order to keep the inhabitant constantly awakened. And I just was super happy to see how all these contrasts that we're discussing today, that many times may be scary and difficult to deal with, are absolutely what we need at the end. More of a comment, thinking of how to teach students not to think about comfort as the ultimate goal of a design nowadays.
I think also in Adriana's example of this neighborhood in Portugal, it's of course the discomfort and the conflict that also creates the meaning. And I think, Adriana, you're completely right when you say meaningfulness, appropriation, and integration should not be seen separately, because in your example, it's actually so that it's through the appropriation that this particular group of people appropriates the neighborhood, appropriates the building, starts to give them meaning through their street art and paintings, and therefore transforming the space, but also creating new meanings. So it's completely interwoven, as you said, and this conflict or discomfort is part of that process, I guess.
Well, we cannot think about culture without thinking about conflict. So conflict is highly productive, and I would say that this is inevitable. The point is, it's difficult to digest this because, as Angelique said, we are always thinking about a supposedly perfect world, and we tend to forget how conflict is important. This sends us back to the Saussure and to what Kris said when he emphasized that system of differences. So meaning is produced in opposition to something else. We need this opposition. We need this other. But we have to know how to deal with the other, how to tackle the other. And that was why I at the end pointed out to that idea of interlocution. Locution, this is a difficult word to pronounce to me. And I was thinking about Omi Baba's understanding of interlocution in his attempt to make the other be recognized in his or her difference. Okay, and I think when we reflect on cities as sites of conflict, we have to take into account this aspect of the interlocution, how places can promote this encounter with the other in his or her difference.
If I may, I would like to add just to change the perspective and to replace the word conflict with meeting with the other, the process of getting to know the other, whether it's a foreigner or the other me, or the space that I'm learning. And this is why I incorporated translation studies to this, because they are channeling images of the other, and sometimes they rewrite them or reinterpret. So in order to get to know the real other with whom to share a place, you need to go through meaning, and then appropriation, and then integration. You know, these are processes that are channeled in order to get that comfort that you were talking about, comfort to have a place of your own and understanding it.
Yeah. I thought, Honorina, that your reference to translation studies was very interesting, because translation studies entails this aspect of a constant cultural negotiation.
Okay.
And I think that I'm not an architecture, so to me it was a bit of a challenge to talk to you. I come from cultural studies, but I think
coming from literature, so
so
very far away from me.
Yeah, I think that we have to reflect on places as places of encounter, but of negotiation. And many times we forget that there is not this opening to this cultural negotiation. Okay.
Thank you very much. I have to emphasize that if you would like to comment or add something, please contact me via chat, because there are currently 37 of us, and I cannot see everybody on the same screen. So please, if you want to add something, send me a chat. Are there any more thoughts, comments, questions? I have a question. Are you hungry? It's almost a couple of minutes before 12 here. So it's actually lunchtime, and I would like to leave you with a question to think about, to get things going towards the discussion about appropriation. Kris mentioned onomastics in his keynote. He said that we tend to give names to objects, to sites, to everything. And then when there's an official name normally given, right? And then after some time, people give it another name. People give it their own name. Is this giving meaning, or is it maybe a kind of appropriation? So I think this is something we could also think about, and we can discuss in our next session about appropriation. I would like to wish you a nice lunch break, and I would like to see everybody back here at 1 o'clock.